As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles, which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of
The doors had barely closed when King Charles delivered the sentence no one inside the palace was prepared to hear. Following an emergency meeting with the most senior members of the royal household, the monarch confirmed that formal plans for Prince William's coronation were now being prepared. It was not a rehearsal, a symbolic exercise, or a distant contingency. It was a direct command. And the silence that followed revealed how deeply the announcement had shaken the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned William, Queen Camilla, Princess Catherine, Princess Anne, and a circle of constitutional advisors with almost no warning. No one knew the purpose. The sealed briefing before the king concerned royal continuity, the system that keeps the monarchy stable when one reign ends and another begins. It also mapped future duties, authority, and the steps needed to prevent confusion around the succession. The king opened the file, looked at his son, and spoke without hesitation. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's central working headquarters, was to begin planning for William's coronation. That meant shaping the ceremony, setting a constitutional timetable, preparing guests, reviewing security, and training the prince for the moment he would become sovereign. The process had begun. William did not smile or move. The future king understood that coronation plans could reach their purpose only after his father's reign ended. And that truth struck harder than the announcement. Camilla turned toward Charles in disbelief. She felt the decision had entered the most private part of their marriage, without giving her time to face its meaning. Charles set his pen beside the briefing file. The gesture carried more force than a raised voice. "This moves forward now," he said, making it clear that the order was active and beyond delay. Anne watched carefully. She noticed a date written in his hand on one page, but before she could read it, the monarch closed the folder. William finally broke the silence. "How far has this already gone?" he asked. Charles met his eyes and answered, "Far enough that you must be ready." No advisor moved. No one offered comfort. The words stripped the meeting of ceremony and exposed the fear beneath it. As the room emptied, Catherine stayed beside her husband. She saw his hands trembling, not from a hunger for the crown, but from what the preparation appeared to say about the man wearing it. Yet the announcement could not be measured through papers alone. Behind every word stood a father, a son, a wife, and a family forced to imagine an ending none wished to name. For the public, a coronation represents ceremony, continuity, and national celebration. For Prince William, it represented something far more painful. Every discussion of the crown placed another invisible distance between him and his father. King Charles had spent a lifetime waiting to reign, but now he was personally preparing the son who would replace him. Inside that contradiction, love and duty began pulling the royal family in opposite directions. William left the meeting without speaking. Catherine followed him into a private corridor, where the prince finally admitted what the announcement had done to him. A coronation, the formal ceremony in which a monarch is crowned and publicly confirmed, sounded glorious to the world. To him, it sounded like loss. He said it as if it were a duty, William told her. But all I heard was the day he would no longer be here. Catherine felt his pain. Yet she understood the danger of refusing preparation. The monarchy could demand leadership without warning, and hesitation at that moment could shake the institution Charles had spent his life protecting. She reached for her husband's hand, but he pulled off his signet ring instead. The small engraved ring carried his family symbol and represented inherited identity. William placed it on a nearby table and whispered, "Everyone sees the crown. No one sees what it costs the son who must wear it." Charles knew that cost better than anyone. He had lived for decades as heir, always visible, always waiting, and never free from the future placed before him. Yet when the king later stopped outside William's room, he could not bring himself to enter. He raised one hand toward the door, paused, then lowered it. The monarch had ordered his son to prepare, but he had not found the courage to explain why. Anne finally broke the silence through a private recorded conversation with William. She revealed that Charles had been reviewing old accession papers late at night. Accession is the immediate legal moment when an heir becomes monarch, even before a coronation takes place. The king had also requested files from the days following Queen Elizabeth II's death, studying how quickly grief had been forced to become duty. Camilla received another shock. Her private secretary informed her that William's future household had already begun identifying senior figures who could serve during his eventual reign. That meant the planning was not symbolic. It had structure, names, and direction. The Queen Consort realised the future was being built around her, while no one had asked whether she was ready to face it. Anne later warned Catherine that the emergency meeting had not started the crisis. It had exposed one. The true beginning came earlier, during a ceremony where Charles lost control for only a few seconds, and those seconds changed everything. The emergency meeting did not begin with a constitutional memorandum. It began 3 weeks earlier during a major state ceremony when King Charles paused in the middle of a formal address and lost his place. The hesitation lasted only seconds, but inside the royal enclosure, it felt endless. William moved instinctively. Camilla froze. Anne watched every face around her. By the time the ceremony ended, the family understood that something fundamental had shifted. Charles had already been carrying a quieter burden. Palace officials had reduced consecutive engagements and increased the duties given to William, Catherine, and Anne at major national events. Those changes mattered because the monarch's schedule was more than a diary. It showed the country who still carried authority and who was beginning to share its weight. Yet the king rejected every suggestion that his constitutional role, the formal duty to represent the state and uphold government continuity, had weakened. The breaking point came during the Commonwealth Remembrance Ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The service honoured the nations linked through the Commonwealth, a voluntary association with historic ties to Britain. Halfway through a prepared declaration, Charles looked down and stopped. Silence spread. William waited, then stepped closer and quietly guided his father towards the missing line. The prince meant to protect him. The king experienced it as exposure. Charles finished the address with controlled dignity, but the restraint vanished afterward. "I did not need rescuing," he told William in a private recorded conversation preserved by a senior aide. The future king apologised, yet refused to pretend the moment had been harmless. He said that standing still would have allowed confusion to grow before the entire congregation. His father heard concern, but he also heard the future pressing against him. Anne watched both men leave the exchange wounded. She understood William had acted out of loyalty, but she also understood why Charles felt humiliated. The monarch had spent decades waiting to lead. Now, in one public pause, his heir had been forced to steady him. Charles summoned his private secretary that evening. He requested the operational files used after Queen Elizabeth II's death, documents explaining how the palace transferred duties during accession, the immediate legal moment when an heir becomes sovereign. Anne later discovered through a written briefing that he had requested another file as well. The private preparation of an heir before transition became unavoidable. Charles removed his reading glasses inside a small palace study and pressed his fingers against his eyes. Then he ordered William's coronation framework, updated under the highest secrecy. Camilla overheard the final words from outside the room and understood exactly what they threatened. The Queen Consort confronted him before the night ended. She demanded that he withdraw the order. Charles refused. What began as vulnerability at Westminster now moved behind a locked door, where the king would be challenged not as a monarch, but as a husband and father. There were no aides inside the room when Queen Camilla finally demanded the truth. Charles had confirmed William's coronation plans before the entire family, but she wanted to know when he had made the decision and why he had hidden it from her. What followed was not a formal royal discussion. It was a confrontation between two people facing the same future from opposite sides, each wounded by what the other appeared unwilling to say aloud. Camilla had stood beside Charles through years of scrutiny, public anger, and private pressure. She believed the most important choices of his reign would be faced together. The crown's continuity, the system that keeps royal authority stable when one monarch is eventually succeeded by another, could not be treated like an ordinary household matter. Yet she had learned of the decision in a room full of advisors, as though her place beside him carried no special weight. Charles refused to retreat. The king said the Westminster ceremony had exposed the danger of waiting until emotion felt comfortable. One hesitation had forced William to act before the country, and that moment had shown how quickly duty could arrive. "The future cannot depend on whether we are ready to look at it," he told her in a private recorded conversation preserved by his secretary. Camilla's anger sharpened. She accused him of treating his reign as though it were already ending. Then she asked whether William and Catherine had begun replacing them before they had even stepped away. The Queen Consort had already seen future briefings move towards the younger couple, and now the pattern felt deliberate. Charles answered with equal force. William was not replacing anyone, he said. The prince was being protected from the chaos that followed Queen Elizabeth II's death. When grief and sovereign responsibility arrived at the same moment, I remembered how quickly sorrow had been pushed aside by accession, the legal transfer of the crown to the heir. I will not leave my son equally unprepared. Camilla pushed her chair back. "Have you planned the day I lose you?" she asked. Charles remained standing. "I have planned the day William must not lose the country as well." The words broke something open. Charles then revealed that he had signed the first coronation planning order on the night of the Westminster incident. The emergency meeting had not created the decision. It had only made the family aware of it. Camilla also learned that Catherine had been invited to begin private preparation for her future role as queen. Her anger gave way to something colder: displacement. William heard their raised voices from outside the locked door. He reached toward the handle, then stopped. Entering would make him the centre of an argument already caused by his future. When the door opened, Charles handed Anne a handwritten instruction granting her authority over the transition preparations if resistance threatened the plan. The argument had ended, but the balance of power had changed. The future now rested with the one royal least likely to surrender to fear, anger, or sentiment. Princess Anne did not ask for control of the transition, but once Charles placed the responsibility in her hands, everyone understood what it meant. She was not there to comfort William, reassure Camilla, or soften the king's command. She was there to make certain the monarchy survived whatever the family felt privately. Yet beneath her discipline, Anne carried memories that made the assignment deeply personal and far more painful than she allowed anyone to see. Anne had always been trusted because she could separate duty from emotion without pretending emotion did not exist. Charles now gave his sister authority to coordinate the king's household, William's team, constitutional advisors, security officials, and ceremonial planners. That role placed her at the centre of the transition machinery, the network of people and procedures that prepares the monarchy for an eventual change of sovereign. William met her with controlled anger. The prince said he would accept every responsibility required of him, but he would not behave as though his father's reign had already become a closing chapter. He feared that preparation could quickly turn into expectation, and expectation could make Charles appear absent, while he was still very much the monarch. Anne did not soften her reply. She told William that love for Charles could not become an excuse for avoiding readiness. When Queen Elizabeth II died, grief had not stopped accession, the immediate legal transfer of the crown from one monarch to the next. Duty had arrived before the family could breathe. She would not allow the same shock to strike him without warning. Anne opened a restricted file and placed it between them. The documents revealed that several parts of William's coronation framework had been drafted years earlier under the late Queen's direction. A coronation framework is the detailed plan for the ceremony, security, constitutional roles, and public responsibilities surrounding a future crowning. The current crisis had activated the work, but it had not created it. William stared at the pages as Anne removed a private note. She slid it across the table. The prince read his grandmother's words twice, then lowered his head. The note instructed that the next heir must receive greater emotional preparation than Charles had received. In that moment, William understood that Elizabeth had anticipated the burden now breaking through him. Anne watched him leave before touching the familiar handwriting herself. Her discipline slipped for only a second. The Queen had prepared everyone for duty, yet her absence still cut through the room with brutal force. Anne then issued a clear order. Preparations would continue, but no public coronation date could be announced that would protect Charles's dignity and William's emotional position. It also gave the family time. The protection failed within hours. A ceremonial scheduling request reached the wrong palace office and triggered immediate changes across the royal household. The secret had begun to move, and Camilla would be the first to feel the future closing around her. The first consequences did not arrive through a public statement. They appeared quietly on palace schedules, seating plans, briefing lists, and future ceremonial files. Queen Camilla's name remained where protocol required it, but decisions that once passed through her office were redirected toward William and Catherine. Nothing had been formally taken from her. That was what made the change so painful. She could feel the future arriving without anyone being willing to admit that it had entered the room. Camilla watched the changes gather around her. William's household began receiving information about future state duties, charitable patronages, royal residences, security chains, and constitutional responsibilities. Patronages are the charities and public causes supported by members of the royal family. These files mattered because they did more than prepare the prince for ceremony. They showed him how power, service, and public trust would eventually move into his hands. Catherine received a different set of instructions. She was asked to study traditions connected to a future queen, including ceremonial duties, national events, and the support expected beside a reigning monarch. The preparation created an unavoidable overlap with work Camilla already performed. The princess understood the sensitivity, but after seeing how deeply William had been shaken, she refused to apologise for standing beside him. Camilla saw elevation where Catherine saw duty. Every redirected briefing felt like another quiet declaration that the younger woman was moving forward, while the Queen Consort remained trapped inside a reign already preparing to look beyond her. The deepest wound arrived through a private scheduling file. Camilla discovered that a coronation planning session had been arranged at Windsor, with Catherine and Anne included, while her own name was missing. A coronation session is a restricted meeting used to shape the ceremony, security, and constitutional roles surrounding a future crowning. She carried the page directly to Charles. Charles did not deny it. The king admitted that he had approved the limited attendance because the session concerned William's reign, not his own. His answer was calm, but its meaning was brutal. For the first time, the separation between the present queen and the future court had been made official. Camilla removed the briefing card bearing her title after he left. She turned it face down and remained silent as the door closed. Later, Catherine visited her privately and said she had no wish to erase anyone. The Queen Consort looked at her and answered, "The crown does not need intention to erase people. It only needs time." William learned what had happened and suspended the next planning session. He believed the process had begun damaging the family it was meant to protect. Charles interpreted the pause differently. The monarch wondered whether his son could carry duty when emotion became unbearable. That doubt forced them toward the conversation both men had avoided. For the first time since the crisis began, Charles and William would meet alone, not as king and heir, but as a father and son forced to speak about loss before either was ready. There was no crown in the room, no private secretary taking notes, and no family member waiting to intervene. King Charles and Prince William sat opposite one another, with nothing between them except the coronation file neither man wanted to open. The father believed preparation was an act of protection. The son experienced it as a countdown. Until that night, both had hidden behind duty. Now they had to decide whether the crown would turn their fear into distance or finally force them to speak honestly. William entered with one purpose. He wanted every planning session suspended until Charles could explain the decision openly to the family. The coronation framework, the full plan covering the ceremony, security, constitutional duties, and the future monarch's preparation, had begun to feel less like guidance and more like a timetable toward loss. The prince could carry responsibility, but he could not pretend the process had no human cost. Charles dismissed the advisors before the conversation began. The king understood that royal procedure had protected him from the very words his son needed to hear. He had issued orders, signed files, and spoken about continuity. Yet none of that explained the fear driving him forward. William finally said what duty had kept buried. Every briefing felt like betrayal. Every signature seemed to accept a future in which his father was gone. He told Charles that cooperating made him feel like a man waiting for an empty throne, instead of a son trying to protect the person who still occupied it. Charles did not answer immediately. Then the monarch confessed through their private recorded conversation that replacement had never been his greatest fear.